There are fates worse than death, and I have lived them all. Once I was a captain, a warrior of the Emperor, a son of steel and fire who believed that death in battle was the greatest honor. But that was before my body broke and my soul was bound into iron. Now I linger, half man, half machine, a prisoner inside a sarcophagus of adamantium that will never let me rest. They call it salvation. I call it damnation. My name no longer matters because I am no longer who I once was. I am what remains when a warrior is denied peace. I am a dreadnought of the Imperium, and this is the story of my horrifying life. And before we march into this cursed tale together, brothers, remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, even a voice like mine needs to be heard. If you find meaning in my words, share them with others so that no sacrifice is forgotten. Subscribe to this tale of steel and shadow, and let the Emperor's truth spread beyond the battlefield. There was a time when I believed death would come to me with honor. I had fought through a dozen wars, carried the banners of my chapter into fire and blood, and thought myself ready to meet the Emperor's gaze. Death on the battlefield was not an end, but a passage, a sacred door every warrior was destined to cross. Yet the truth is that death would have been a mercy. What I was given instead was something far worse, a waking eternity inside an iron tomb that breathes when I cannot, that walks when I should have been still, that kills because it remembers I once knew how. The last memory I had as a man was of battle, the kind of chaos that shreds courage into terror and muddies glory with despair. Orcs had stormed our defenses in waves, a sea of green muscle and rusted steel, their war cries rolling like thunder across the smoking plains of Morak Prime. I remember the flash of my power fist, crushing the skull of their warlord, his black blood spraying across my armor as he bellowed in defiance even while dying. And then his axe, one last strike, desperate, perfectly placed. I felt it tear through the plates at my spine, felt bone snap and flesh tear, felt the light fade. For a heartbeat I thought that was the end, but there are no endings in this cursed life. I awoke not to peace, but to steel. The darkness that should have held me forever was broken by the cold glow of machine optics feeding data into my mind. I reached for my own body and found nothing of it left. No hands, no voice, no breath. Only the grinding groan of gears where lungs should have been. Only the echo of iron limbs answering when I tried to move. I remember the first voice I heard in that new existence, Chaplain Marai, his skull-faced helm bent close, his words heavy with ritual as though prayer could cleanse the cruelty of what they had done. "Brother Captain," he said, "you have been chosen for the highest honor. Your service continues. Honor." That word spoken so easily cut deeper than the axe that had broken my body. I tried to ask him what had been done to me, but the sound that came out was a mechanical rasp, an echo of a man already gone. "You are reborn," he told me, though his tone carried the weight of guilt. "The apothecaries could not save your flesh, but your spirit burned too brightly to let fade. You are interred." "You are Dreadnought! Dreadnought!" I had once revered them, towering engines of the chapter's wrath that strode like gods across the battlefield. To fight beside one was to stand in the shadow of legend. But I had never understood why their movements were so heavy, why their voices carried such sorrow. Only then did I know they were not machines of glory, they were prisons of the living dead. 3 days had passed since my mortal body had been shattered. 3 days in which my soul should have found rest in the Emperor's embrace. Instead, I had been bound into this sarcophagus, this coffin of iron and ceramite. My brothers told me it was salvation. To me, it felt like a sentence, and already I knew the punishment would last centuries. The first deployment came sooner than I imagined. Orc raiders had struck at an agri-world in the Hadrian system, and the iron hammers were dispatched to cleanse them. They placed me in a drop pod, as though I were still a man among brothers. But I was not. Where once I had checked my bolter and whispered litanies over my chainsword, I now flexed the grinding fist of adamantium and calibrated the targeting arrays of an assault cannon. There were no prayers left for me, only silence. The descent was violent, as every drop pod strike is, but the adrenaline that once thundered in my twin hearts was gone. Sensors told me of speed, of impact, of atmosphere clawing at the pod's hull, but they told me in numbers, in lines of data. The moment the pod slammed into the soil and its doors burst open, I did not breathe the alien air. I did not feel the weight of ground beneath my boots. I only walked forward on legs of steel, seeing the world through optics that fed me distance and trajectory instead of light. And yet when the battle began, something stirred. My cannon roared like the Emperor's wrath itself, shredding orcs in a storm of fire. My power fist cracked armor and bone with a force my mortal form could never have dreamed of. I was destruction incarnate, relentless, untouchable. In those hours of carnage, I almost believed there was purpose in what had been done to me. But when the last orc fell, when silence swallowed the battlefield and the war song of my brothers rose around me, I felt the hollowness return. They sang, I did not. They walked into the transports as men returning home. I was loaded into a separate hold, my machine shell locked down, my system cycling into what they called sleep. But sleep was not sleep. It was a darkness deeper than death, a void without dreams or memory. And when I woke again, it was as if centuries had passed in an instant. The second time I woke, I did not know if minutes or millennia had passed. In the sarcophagus, time is not measured in moments, but in nothingness. There are no dreams, no warmth, no whisper of thought. Only the abyss. When my sensors flickered to life again, it felt like being torn out of death. Like consciousness was a cruel chain dragging me back into a world I no longer wished to see. They did not ask me if I was ready. They never do. I came online to the sound of klaxons, the stench of oil, the prayers of tech priests brushing sacred oils across my frame, as though ritual could sanctify what was, in truth, desecration. A serf's voice read out diagnostic checks while another daubed my hull with runes of warding. None of it mattered. The machine worked. The man inside endured. That was all the chapter cared for. The battle awaiting me was not the simple savagery of orcs. This time, it was worse. A warband of Chaos Marines had emerged from the warp near Korath, our homeworld. Traitors. Men who had once been as we were, now twisted by the whispers of the dark gods. My brothers prepared for war with grim silence, and I was dragged from my tomb because I was useful, not because I was willing. I remember striding into the fortress hangar, colossal among my kin. They looked up at me with reverence, as though I were a saint reborn. I wanted to scream at them that I was not their ancestor, not their relic, not their honored ancient. I was a prisoner inside an armored coffin, forced to fight wars I had never chosen. But the scream remained trapped, twisted into a grinding metallic rasp that passed only for commands. When the battle came, I faced a reflection of myself, a chaos dreadnought, a twisted sarcophagus of rust and screaming demon faces lumbered into view. Its pilot had once been a space marine like me, perhaps even a brother in some forgotten campaign. Now he was a beast, enslaved not only to his machine but to the corruption gnawing at his soul. Our weapons clashed, sparks showering across the ruins, the air vibrating with every strike. Through vox-crackled speakers, his voice hissed with centuries of hatred. Do you see what you have become, loyalist? A ghost in a cage, a soul in chains. You think you serve your emperor, but you serve only the machine that devours you. I crushed his helm with my power fist, silencing him forever. But his words echoed long after the wreck of his body stopped twitching. Was I truly any different? A soul chained to iron, a warrior denied peace, reduced to a weapon that could never stop killing. I told myself I fought for the Emperor, but in truth, I fought because they would not let me rest. When the Chaos Warband was driven back into the warp, we counted our dead. My brothers stood shoulder to shoulder in the funeral rites, their voices lifted in hymns of mourning, their fallen laid upon pyres. I stood silent, towering among them, unable even to kneel. They said those brothers had earned their peace. I envied them. Their duty was done. Mine had only begun. Afterward, they wheeled me back into the fortress's deep vaults, the place where ancients are kept between battles. The chamber was vast, filled with rows of sarcophagi like mine, each humming softly with the lives trapped inside. Some were silent, their occupants finally granted death. Others whispered through the Vox network, voices like ghosts in a cathedral. One of them spoke to me. His name was Brother Ancient Gareth, and he had been interred for centuries beyond counting. His voice was metallic but carried a warmth that surprised me. "First battles are always the hardest," he said. "You still remember what it was to be flesh and blood. That memory is both blessing and curse. How do you bear it?" I asked. "The waiting, the endless silence, by forgetting," he answered. "Each time you wake, you will remember a little less. The man fades. The warrior remains. It is the only kindness the machine grants us. Kindness." That word struck me like a blade. To forget would mean losing what little remained of Ulrich Vaynor, captain of the Iron Hammers. To forget would mean letting the machine swallow me whole. And yet, was that not already happening? When my system cycled down again, I feared not the void. I feared waking once more, only to find that another piece of me was gone. The third time I awoke, frost rimmed the inside of my sarcophagus. My sensors flickered against the cold static crawling across my vision like ghosts. For a moment I thought I had been abandoned, entombed, and forgotten in the deep vaults. But then I heard a voice, not Gareth's, not any I had known before. "Brother Ancient Gareth is at rest," came the crackling reply across the Vox. "His vigil ended 37 years ago. I am Brother Ancient Matthias. Welcome back to the living, Ulrich. 37 years. I had slept that long, though to me it had been nothing. A blink into void and back. Gareth, who had counseled me to forget, was gone. Granted the peace he had long endured without. I should have rejoiced for him. Instead, I felt something colder than the frost clinging to my sarcophagus. Fear. For if Gareth could fade into silence, how long before the same claim was made of me? I asked Matthias what I had missed. He answered in the way ancients often do. Much and little. Wars fought, wars won. Brothers fallen and replaced. The Imperium endures as it always has. The details fade. Only the eternal truths remain. But I remembered Gareth's words, that forgetting was the only kindness. And I realized with horror that I was beginning to lose pieces already. The faces of my old squad blurred when I tried to recall them. Their laughter, their oaths, even their deaths on Morak Prime slipped through my grasp like ash in the wind. When I reached into memory, I found only fragments, a gleam of armor, the sound of bolter fire, the weight of command, but no warmth. No names in time. I was deployed again. The campaign should have been familiar, orcs, chaos raiders, but it all blurred. My tactical databases recorded every skirmish with precision, every casualty, every victory. Yet when I tried to remember as a man remembers, I found only shadows. My cannon thundered, my fist crushed. My brothers shouted litanies, and when it was done, I was locked down again, silence claiming me until the next war. It was in one such silence that I dreamed for the first time. Dreams are not meant for us. We are supposed to know only the void between awakenings. But this was no void. I found myself walking corridors lined with battle honors, names etched into marble, banners heavy with dust. At their center I saw a man in armor I recognized yet did not know. When he turned, I saw my own face. "I am who you were," the figure said. "The warrior who died on Morak Prime. The man they cut away to keep this thing alive. You are losing me." And I knew he spoke truth. With every awakening, the line between man and machine blurred further. My voice rasped from vox grills. My body was cold ceramite. My thoughts more calculation than memory. I feared the day when nothing of Ulrich remained, when only the weapon endured. I woke from that dream to the chants of tech priests, their prayers rising like smoke around my sarcophagus. They spoke of duty, of honor, of salvation, yet their words rang hollow because I now knew the truth. This was not salvation. It was imprisonment. Not death, not life, but something far worse. And so Chapter 1 closes not with triumph, but with a realization. I was no longer a captain, no longer even a man. I was a dreadnought, a soul chained to a coffin of steel, cursed to wake only for war, cursed to sleep only in emptiness. I had been told it was an honor, but deep within I understood it was a horror. And it was only the beginning. There is no calendar for us, no sunrise or sunset to mark the flow of time. Only the rhythm of war and the silence between. A mortal might measure years in seasons, victories, or wounds. For me, the measure was how many times I awoke to new faces, new wars, and a world slightly older than when last I left it. The first decades blurred. I was called again and again, roused from the tomb by alarms and prayers. My system stirred to life not by choice but by necessity. The enemy changed with every awakening. Orcs howling across the plains of one world. Heretics screaming litanies to false gods on another. Eldar shadows flickering through ruined cathedrals. Even the hollow ranks of Necron warriors rising like metal phantoms. The specifics mattered little. The mission was always the same. Destroy, purge, endure, and endure I did. My weapon spoke louder than any hymn, tearing through flesh and armor alike. My power fist reduced walls and enemies to ruins with equal ease. I became the spearhead, the hammer, the unbreakable shield. In every battle, the brothers at my side looked to me not only as a weapon, but as a relic of their chapter's history. Their faith burned bright. They still felt fear and triumph, joy and sorrow. I felt none of it. At first, I tried to cling to the fragments of my humanity. I recited oaths within the silence of my mind. I recalled the names of brothers I had known, faces I had once sworn to protect. But the more I tried, the more those names slipped into shadow. Decades passed, and their features blurred into nothingness. I would awaken and see men bearing the heraldry of the Iron Hammers, yet I did not know them. They were always younger than the last, always new, always eager to stand beside the ancient, and I, entombed, could never keep pace with time. Once I asked a young sergeant his name after a battle. He looked up at me with reverence, proud to be remembered by one as old as I. His lips formed words, but even as he spoke, I felt the memory fading, slipping through my mind like water. By the time I was cycled back into the vault, I could no longer recall it. When next I awoke, he was already gone, his name carved among the honored dead. This was the endless war. Not merely the battles, but the erosion of memory itself. My victories stacked like stones, heavy and countless, but my memories crumbled. In time, I could no longer recall the faces of my own captains, the voices of those who had once fought beside me in flesh. What remained were fragments, the sound of bolters, the weight of command, the smell of promethium burning. Everything else dissolved. Even the rituals of preparation grew strange. Each awakening, the chants of tech priests had shifted slightly, their rites altered by decades of tradition. The halls where I was stored showed new inscriptions, new statues, new banners. At first, these changes startled me. Later, they became the only reminder that time had passed at all. For me, there was only void, then war, then void again. Centuries could have passed, or only months, I no longer knew, and yet I fought on. Because what else was there? If I ceased, I would join Gareth in silence. If I endured, I remained a weapon the chapter could wield. Somewhere, in the shrinking remnants of my humanity, I wondered if that endurance meant I still lived, or if it meant I was already lost. There is a cruelty in awakening that words can scarcely carry. It is not like the rousing of a sleeper to dawn's light, or the call of duty answered by a soldier's heartbeat. It is the tearing of a soul out of the abyss, thrust into awareness without consent. Every time my systems flare to life, I feel the machinery seize my body before my thoughts even return. The sarcophagus breathes for me, moves for me, fights for me, and I am reminded that I am no longer master of myself. One such awakening came during the defense of Korath itself. The traitor Astartes had returned in greater numbers, their war bands spilling across our skies like a tide of black iron. The fortress monastery shook with the fury of orbital bombardment, and my brothers sang hymns to steel their courage. I did not sing. I roared into battle, my cannon shredding the corrupted forms of those who had once shared the Emperor's gene. It was there, in the shattered courtyards of our homeworld, that I faced another reflection of what I was becoming. A traitor Dreadnought, bloated with demonic corruption, lurched toward me. Its armor was a writhing mass of faces screaming for release, its weapons fused with flesh and hatred. As we clashed, sparks lighting the ruins around us, I heard its pilot's voice, a mockery carried through Vox speakers corroded by centuries of warp taint. You fight for nothing, Ghost. You think you are honored? You are chained. We at least chose our damnation. I silenced him with my fist, crushing the demon-fused helm. But his words lingered long after his form was scrap. Was I truly any different? He was enslaved by corruption. I was enslaved by duty. Both of us, souls trapped in iron, denied release. After the battle, I was not granted rest. My brothers stood in mourning halls, chanting rites for those who had fallen, placing their ashes in reliquaries that would outlast empires. I stood apart, silent and immovable. They grieved, and their grief gave them strength. I envied them. Grief had left me. Even sorrow was being stripped from me, filed away by the machine that devoured my memory. And then the void claimed me once more. When next I opened my eyes, I did not recognize the chamber. The banners were different. The prayers had changed. The faces of my attendants were all strangers. I asked them how long it had been. One of them, a young serf who trembled even in my shadow, whispered the answer. 37 years. 37 years erased. 37 years of brothers I would never know, of battles I would never remember. To them I was eternal, a constant, a relic. To myself, I was hollowed further, a shell with less and less of Ulrich Veinar left inside. It was then I realized the true horror of my existence. The enemy was not merely Orc or Chaos or Xenos. The enemy was time. Time that gnawed at the edges of who I had been, stripping me away piece by piece until only the weapon remained. Still, they called me to war. Still I answered, because I had no choice. The campaigns that followed might as well have been the same war fought again and again. Different worlds, different enemies, but always the same pattern. Awaken, destroy, endure, and sleep. I was sent against Orc hordes where their crude weapons sparked harmlessly against my armor, and I ground them into the soil until the earth itself ran black with their blood. I fought Eldar raiders in labyrinthine ruins where their movements were too swift for mortal eyes, but not for my targeting systems, and their dying cries were just echoes against the walls. I was thrown into sieges against heretics who turned their cathedrals into fortresses, and I tore them down stone by stone until the screams of the damned were silenced beneath rubble and fire. Victory was constant, but it was hollow. Every battle blurred into the next. Every enemy became the same. Their faces meant nothing. Their deaths meant less. Even my brothers became strangers to me. They rotated in and out of the squads I fought beside. And though they greeted me as ancient, their voices filled with awe. I did not know them. I tried, once, to remember their names as they told them to me before a drop. By the end of the campaign, I had already forgotten. They were gone before I could recall their faces, replaced by others just as young, just as eager, just as doomed. The strangest part was not the loss of others, but the loss of myself. I began to realize that even my own memories were slipping. I no longer saw the face of my father, no longer heard the laughter of my brothers at arms from my days as a flesh and blood captain. I no longer remembered the sound of my own voice. When I tried to think of Ulrich Veinar, it felt as though I was studying a name etched on a data slate, a record of someone who had once lived, not someone who still breathed within me. And yet in war, I functioned flawlessly, perhaps even better than before. My strategies grew sharper, my calculations swifter, my aim more precise. The machine was winning piece by piece, consuming the man and leaving only the weapon. My brother saw this and called it wisdom. They thought I was becoming something more, a paragon of the chapter's will. But I knew the truth. I was not becoming more, I was becoming less. In time, even the rituals that surrounded me grew alien. The litanies sung by tech priests before battle had shifted. The hymns of my chapter had new verses. The fortress halls where I was stored bore statues of heroes I did not know, battles I had never heard of. To them I was eternal. To myself I was fading. And then came the long sleep, longer than any before. When I awoke, frost lined my sarcophagus and the vault was darker, emptier. Many of the other dreadnoughts had gone silent. Their vigil ended, their humanity extinguished at last. I searched for Gareth's voice, for the counsel of the ancient who had once spoken to me. There was only static. He was gone, granted peace I was still denied. In that silence, I finally understood the name of this chapter in my life. The endless war. Not endless battles, not endless victories, but an endless erosion of self. To fight forever was not glory. It was slow death, stretched across centuries until nothing remained of the man I once was. And with that realization, I feared more than the enemies I fought. I feared what I was becoming. Sleep should have been peace. For mortals, it is a reprieve, a place where dreams bring fragments of joy or sorrow, where memory softens and the soul drifts. For us entombed in iron, sleep is not sleep at all. It is void, a nothingness so absolute it feels as though existence itself has been stripped away. When we wake, it is like being dragged screaming from the grave. But one time the void was broken. I dreamed. I walked through halls I knew yet did not recognize. The walls were carved with the battle honors of my chapter, banners of victories I had once fought for. But when I looked closer, the names beneath them were not mine. They belonged to warriors I had never known, heroes who had come and gone while I slept. The marble seemed to shift beneath my gaze as though history itself had grown alien to me. At the end of the hall, I saw him, a figure in power armor, his back turned, studying a tactical display. His posture was familiar, steady, confident, the stance of a commander who believed utterly in his cause. When he turned, I froze. The face staring back at me was my own, but it was not the face of the machine I had become. It was me as I once had been, flesh and blood, scars earned in battle, eyes burning with conviction. His voice, when he spoke, was my voice. Not the rasp of Vox grills, but the human timbre I had lost centuries ago. "Hello, Ulrich," he said. "Who are you?" I asked, though in my heart I already knew. "I am who you were. The warrior who died on Morak Prime. The man they cut away when they sealed you in that tomb. Everything you've forgotten. I am what remains of it." I wanted to deny him. I wanted to claim that I was still that man, that I had held on to my humanity despite the iron cage around me. But the truth weighed heavy. Each awakening, more of my past had slipped away. Names, faces, laughter, even grief. I was not whole. I was a shadow of myself. "Why are you here?" I asked. "To remind you," he said, his eyes filled with sorrow. "To show you what they took when they called it an honor. You think you still serve the Emperor. You think you are still Ulrich Venar. But every time you sleep, every time you wake, more of me is gone. You are not eternal, brother. You are eroding." His words struck harder than any orc axe or chaos blade ever had. Eroding. That was the word. Not living, not enduring, not even surviving, just eroding, like stone under centuries of storm. In the dream, I looked down at myself and saw not armor, but the truth. My limbs were cannons and weapons. My torso was an armored tomb. The faint scrap of flesh that still housed my consciousness was buried deep within, shrunken and pitiful. I was not a man in armor. I was a machine that carried the ghost of a man. "They told me it was honor," I whispered. "They told you many things," my other self replied. "But they did not tell you the price. The price is you. Every memory, every feeling, every trace of who you once were, all of it will be gone until nothing remains but the weapon." And before the dream faded, he spoke one last time. "Remember this, Ulrich. For as long as you are able, remember what it felt like to be human. It is the only thing that can save you from the abyss." I woke to the hum of activation, to the prayers of tech priests and the rasp of my own artificial voice. The dream should have been impossible, yet it clung to me like a wound. For the first time in centuries, I did not fear the enemy. I feared the silence between wars. I feared myself. The dreams did not stop. Once broken, the void was no longer absolute. Each time I was dragged back into silence, fragments of humanity clawed their way through the abyss to reach me. At first they were faint echoes, the laughter of brothers I could no longer name, the faint scent of oil on bolter casings, the weight of sunlight across armor after a victory. Ghosts of sensations, not full memories, but reminders that I had once lived as a man. Then the visions grew clearer. I stood again on Morak Prime, where I had fallen. The battlefield lay before me in frozen tableau. Orcs locked mid-charge, explosions hanging in the air like painted fire. I walked among them untouched, a ghost wandering a memory that had already slipped from me. And at the center, I saw my younger self again, power fist raised, eyes burning with fury. "You should not be here," he said. Without turning. Neither should you, I answered. He faced me then, his expression lined with anger. I died, that was my ending. But you refused it, or they refused it for you. And now we are both trapped. I cannot rest, and you cannot live. His words cut deep. I wanted to protest, to claim that I had not chosen this fate. But deep within I knew that did not matter. Choice had never been mine. Duty had been drilled into me since my first day as a neophyte. Even in death they had demanded more. The dream fractured into another. I was back in the sarcophagus chamber, surrounded by rows of other ancients. Their voices whispered across the vox like the wind through a graveyard. Some prayed. Some muttered fragments of names or oaths, words stripped of meaning. Others screamed without sound, their agony lost in static. I realized then that I was not alone in my prison. Hundreds of us lingered in these coffins, each fighting the same endless erosion. Some had surrendered to it, becoming little more than machines that obeyed without thought. Others clung desperately to fragments of themselves, flickers of humanity that grew dimmer with every sleep. I did not know which fate was worse. When I awoke for the next campaign, the dream still weighed heavy. My brothers greeted me with reverence, their chaplain intoning litanies to awaken the ancient Ulrich Venar. I heard the words, but they no longer fit. Was I still Ulrich, or was I just the echo of his voice? The weapon that carried his name because the chapter needed it so. The battle that awaited was against the Necrons, soulless constructs of metal, unfeeling, unchanging, eternal. I cut through their ranks with fury, but as I did I could not shake the thought that I was closer to them than to the men fighting beside me. They were machines with the remnants of souls bound to eternal war. So was I. The only difference was that their curse came from alien science and mine from the desperate hands of my own brothers. When the war ended and the silence returned, I did not rest. I fell into the dream again, the same hall of banners, the same reflection of my younger self. But this time he was fading. His features were blurred, his voice weaker. "You are forgetting me," he said. "No," I whispered, though even as I spoke, I knew it was true. His face, once so clear, now shifted like smoke. His words echoed with distance as though already being erased. "If you let go of me," he warned, "then you are gone. Not a man, not a warrior, not even a memory. Only the machine." And then he was gone, leaving me in silence so deep it crushed me more than any void ever had. The silence after that dream was worse than any battle. When the tech priests shut me down, I no longer feared the void itself. I feared the loss that came with it. Each awakening stripped another thread from the tapestry of who I had been, until the picture itself was unrecognizable. I wondered how many more times I could be pulled into war before even the memory of my own name was gone. Perhaps that was why the chaplains repeated it so often when they roused me. Ancient Ulrich Venar. As if saying it aloud would keep the ghost tethered a little longer. But even they could not stop the erosion. There came a campaign. I do not even remember the planet's name, where the fighting dragged on for months. The enemy was human, traitors who had abandoned the Emperor for promises of power. They were fragile things compared to Xenos or heretics of iron, yet they fought with the desperation of those who knew they had already damned themselves. We tore through them like a hurricane of steel, and when it was done, their bodies lay in heaps around the ruins of their false shrines. In the aftermath, I heard the voices of my brothers lifted in prayer. They praised the Emperor. They praised the chapter. They praised me, but none of their words reached me. Because in that moment, surrounded by the broken dead, I realized I could no longer remember the faces of the men I had just fought beside. Only hours had passed, yet already they blurred into shadows. I was fighting beside strangers in every battle, and worse, they became strangers even before my optics dimmed again. That night, as the tech priests prepared to entomb me once more, I begged silently to the Emperor, not for victory, not for strength, for memory, to remember who I was, who I had fought with, who I had lost. But the silence of the void was the only answer I received. And then once again I dreamed. This time the hall was empty. The banners were gone, the marble walls bare. At its center stood only the sarcophagus, My sarcophagus, looming like a monolith of iron. And in front of it, my younger self knelt, his form half shattered, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You are almost gone," he said. I reached for him, but my hands were not hands. They were the claws of the machine, grinding servos and steel fingers incapable of touch. He flinched from me as though I were no longer something he could recognize. "Hold on," I rasped. "I will not let you fade." But even as I spoke, he dissolved into dust, carried on a wind that had no source. The banners returned then, not with my victories, but with names I had never known, faces I had never seen. The hall had become a mausoleum of strangers, and I was lost among them, unable to find myself. I woke with a roar, my vox grills bellowing a sound that shook the chamber. The serfs cowered. The chaplain raised his crozius in benediction, chanting words to calm me. They thought it was battle rage, the hunger for war that never left an ancient. They did not know it was terror, not of death, not of enemies, but of vanishing. By the end of that campaign, I knew the truth. The prison was not my sarcophagus. The prison was my memory, and its walls were closing in. The siege came without warning, like a storm breaking against a shore already battered by centuries of war. The fortress world of Weimar had long stood as a bastion against the tides of chaos, its walls etched with victories older than most chapters themselves. It was there they chose to wake me, and from the moment my optics cleared, I knew this war would be different. The air was thick with incense and fear. Even the chaplain's voice, usually iron, carried a tremor when he spoke my name. Outside, the sky burned red with warp lightning, the air itself tasting of ash and corruption. Traitor warbands had descended in numbers that turned night into endless flame, and their hosts carried engines of destruction that rivaled my own frame. The battle would not be won easily, if it could be won at all. As the gates trembled with the impact of their bombardment, I felt something stir deep within me. It was not battle fury. The machine had long since dulled that fire. It was not the cold efficiency that had guided my cannon and fist through countless wars. It was something older, buried beneath centuries of silence. A memory. I remembered the first oath I had sworn as a neophyte, my hand pressed to the aquila carved into the stone of our fortress, to serve the emperor with flesh, blood and soul until none remain. Flesh had been taken, blood had dried, but soul still lingered, though faint, though fragile. And for the first time in centuries, I feared not losing myself to the void, but losing that last ember forever. When the gates broke and the enemy poured in, I met them with fury not seen since I was a man of flesh. My assault cannon thundered until its barrels glowed red. My power fist tore traitors from their mounts and crushed them into ruin. I strode through the breach like a titan of old, and my brothers rallied to me, their voices rising in hymns that shook the ruins. For a moment I felt as though I still belonged among them. For a moment I was not just a machine, but then he came. A warlord in corrupted armor, his frame swollen with the gifts of his dark gods, his eyes burning with unnatural fire. He laughed when he saw me, the sound carried through vox like a blade scraping across bone. "Look at you," he sneered, "a corpse piloting a coffin. You think you are alive? You think you are man? You are nothing. You are the emperor's lie made fleshless." His words struck deeper than his blows, though his blows were mighty indeed. We clashed in the heart of the fortress, the ground shattering beneath our struggle. My cannon tore through his retinue, but his blade carved rents into my armor, each strike spilling sparks like blood. He circled me, mocking with every strike. "You are no warrior. You are no brother. You are already dead, machine. Admit it. Join us, and perhaps your soul will remember what it was." I wanted to deny him, to roar that I still fought for the emperor, that I was still Ulrich Weimar. But deep within, doubt gnawed at me. Was I truly alive? Or was I just a weapon that remembered it had once been a man? His laughter echoed, feeding that doubt, and for the first time I wavered. The machine urged calculation. It told me to fight with precision, to let go of hesitation, to become steel and nothing more. It whispered that survival lay not in clinging to fading humanity, but in embracing the purity of the weapon. And for a heartbeat I considered it. To surrender, To become the machine entirely, to let go of the agony of memory and be nothing but what they had forged me to be. But then in the midst of battle I heard it, a voice not through Vox, not through data. A memory's voice, fragile but real. The laughter of my squad on Morak Prime, the sound of their oaths spoken beside me. Faces I thought lost flickered like dying stars, and for a single instant they returned. No, I growled, the word grinding through my Vox like thunder. I am not gone. Not yet. And I struck with all the fury of a man who refused to be erased. The traitor's blade slammed into my armor again and again, each strike sending tremors through my frame. Warning runes flared across my vision, system after system screaming in protest, but I ignored them. Pain in this form was not the fire of nerves, but the cold of failing circuits, the loss of function piece by piece. Still I stood, still I fought. He circled me like a predator, his laughter echoing through the ruins. You cling to an illusion, he spat. A ghost of a man long dead. Your name is Ash, your soul already gone. Why resist what you are? Become the weapon. Become what they made you. For a moment I felt the temptation again, to surrender, to let the machine claim me fully, to stop the torment of remembering what I had lost. It would be easier. No more dreams, no more fading faces, no more grief that lingered without names to attach it to. The machine offered silence, certainty, efficiency. But in that moment of doubt, I remembered what my younger self had said in the dream. If you let go of me, then you are gone. Gone. Not dead. Worse. Erased. The thought lit a fire in me greater than any machine's calculations could fathom. I roared, my Vox grills spitting a sound that was half static, half the voice of a man refusing to surrender. My fist met his blade, crushing it into shards that screamed against the stone. My cannon roared at point-blank range, tearing through corrupted ceramite, sending his bloated form staggering. I am not a ghost, I bellowed. I am not just a machine. I am Ulrich Vayner. The words shook me more than they shook him, for it had been centuries since I had spoken my own name in battle. Brothers still called me Ancient Relic Legend. None had called me Ulrich. Saying it aloud was like pulling it back from the abyss. The warlord snarled, striking with claws of warp-forged iron. But I caught him in my power fist. For a heartbeat, our optics locked. His burning with demon fire, mine with the cold light of machine sensors. And yet behind mine, I knew, still flickered the ember of a man. You think this is victory? He rasped as I crushed him, his corrupted body breaking, ichor spraying across the stone. Even if you destroy me, you will fade. The machine will devour you. Nothing will remain. Perhaps, I answered, my voice a grinding growl, but not today. I crushed him into ruin, his form collapsing into sparks and smoke, the demon within him shrieking as it was torn back into the warp. The courtyard fell silent but for the hymn of bolters and the cry of my brothers pushing the enemy back. I stood among them, my frame scarred and burning, systems failing in a dozen places. Yet for the first time in centuries I felt not like a relic, not like a weapon. I felt like a man who had made a choice. The machine had urged me to let go. The enemy had mocked me as already lost. But I had chosen otherwise. I had chosen to remember. And in that choice, fragile as it was, I found something greater than victory. I found defiance. The traitor warlords' ruin should have broken their spirit, yet still they came. The horde pressed through the shattered gates, demons howling, traitor marines bellowing their profane litanies, their engines of war grinding over the bones of the fallen. The fortress shook with every impact. Towers crumbled, walls split, fire washed the sky red. I stood in the breach, scarred and burning, my frame battered but unbroken. My brothers rallied at my sides, their chants rising in defiance. For the first time in centuries I felt as though I fought with them, not merely beside them. I was not their relic, I was their shield. But the enemy's tide was endless. For every heretic that fell beneath my cannon, two more surged forward. For every demon I crushed in my fist, another clawed its way screaming through the warp-torn sky. My systems faltered, warning runes flashing crimson across my vision. Each one a reminder that my borrowed existence was collapsing. Yet still I fought. because to stop was to surrender to the machine's cold silence. A missile struck my left side, tearing away plating, spilling sparks and flame. I staggered, and the machine whispered within me, "Shut down. Let go, you cannot endure." But memory flared against the whisper. I remembered my first oath as a neophyte, my brothers beside me on Morak Prime, Gareth's voice telling me forgetting was a kindness, my own younger self warning that if I let him go, I was gone. I would not let it end in silence. Not yet. I planted my feet into the broken stone and roared through my vox, a sound that tore through the din of battle. "Stand with me, brothers! Let the traitors break against us as waves upon the cliffs of Terra." Their voices rose with mine, a thunder of hymns and bolter fire, and together we pushed back the tide. Step by step, wound by wound, we turned despair into defiance. My assault cannon jammed, overheated, dead, so I tore it free and wielded my fist alone, crushing, breaking, smashing through the corrupted masses. At last, the warband faltered. Their demon engines shrieked as they were dragged screaming back into the warp. The traitor Marines broke, retreating into the burning ruins. For the first time in weeks, silence fell, but victory was ash in my mouth. My frame was ruined, my sarcophagus cracked, fluid leaking, systems dying. My brothers gathered around me, chanting hymns of triumph, calling me ancient savior of Weimar. Their voices blurred, distant, as though echoing down a long corridor. I tried to look at them, to remember their faces, but already they faded like all the rest. In that moment, I realized the choice had been made. Not once, not just in battle, but in every breath I still clung to. I had chosen humanity, no matter how fleeting, over surrender to the machine. It had not saved me. It had not spared me from erosion, but it had given me one last truth, that I was still Ulrich Veinar, and I would die as such. As my systems failed and darkness crept in, I feared not death but the silence that would follow. Yet for the first time, that silence did not feel like void. It felt like waiting for the final vigil. Darkness closed in, not the empty void of machine sleep, but something deeper. My system sputtered, sparks scattering like dying stars, every rune on my display screaming red. I could feel the sarcophagus itself cracking, the shell that had imprisoned me for centuries finally beginning to fail. And for the first time since Morak Prime, I felt something like peace. The battlefield around me was quiet, or perhaps I could no longer hear. My brothers' voices were faint, their hymns muffled as though spoken from the other side of a wall. I saw them moving, saw their armor gleam in the firelight, but their faces were shadows already dissolving into memory. I wanted to remember them, each of them for once, but my mind was failing, slipping away as surely as my frame was breaking. The machine whispered one last time, "Shut down, accept, fade." And yet I resisted. Not with fury, not with defiance, but with something gentler. I thought of the laughter of my squad on Morak Prime. I thought of Gareth's voice in the darkness, telling me forgetting was kindness. I thought of my younger self, the man I had once been, warning me never to let go. All of them were fading, but for this last moment, I remembered. Perhaps that was all the humanity I had left, the ability to choose what to hold on to, even as the abyss claimed the rest. The chaplain's voice broke through the haze. His crozius lifted high, his words heavy with ritual. "Ancient Ulrich Veinar," he cried, "your vigil is ended. Your duty is fulfilled. Rest now in the Emperor's light." Rest. The word was foreign to me after centuries of war, yet it was all I had ever wanted. I felt the weight of my iron body slipping away, each system shutting down one by one, until only the faint flicker of flesh within remained. And then even that began to dim, but before the end, I spoke. My vox was broken, my voice little more than static and grinding gears, but the words carried through the silence. "Do not call this an honor," I rasped. "Remember us not as relics, not as weapons. Remember us as men who were denied peace. Learn from our damnation, so you never repeat it." The words cost me everything, yet when they left me I felt lighter, freer. My last testament had been spoken, not as a machine, not as a weapon, but as Ulrich Venar. And then the darkness took me. But this time it was not void. This time it was rest. I do not know if there is an afterlife for warriors such as us. The chaplains speak of the Emperor's embrace, of thrones of light awaiting the faithful, of eternal service made holy. Perhaps it is true. Perhaps it is only another lie told to keep us fighting. I no longer care. What I felt in those last moments was not the hand of a god, nor the chains of a machine. It was silence, true silence, and it was enough. Yet even as the darkness closed around me, fragments clung like embers refusing to die. The halls of my chapter rose in memory, filled with banners I had never truly seen, lined with names I had never managed to hold. For once they did not blur or fade. I walked among them whole, no longer iron but flesh, no longer weapon but man. My younger self was there, not fading now but steady, standing at my side. He placed a hand upon my shoulder, and for the first time in centuries I felt warmth. "You did not let go," he said. "No," I answered, though my voice was only thought. "Not until the end." And together we walked beyond the banners into a light I cannot describe. Whether it was the Emperor's presence or only the last flicker of my mind unraveling, I cannot say. It does not matter, for in that final breath of being, I was no longer eroding. I was whole. What remains of me now is not the iron coffin, not the centuries of war, not the endless silence. What remains is the story. My words carried on vox and memory will echo through my chapter long after the sarcophagus has gone cold. Perhaps they will call me hero. Perhaps they will call me ancient, but I hope, I pray, that they will remember me as a man who was cursed with eternity, and who at the last chose to die human. If these words reach you, brother, know this: do not envy the Dreadnought. Do not long for the immortality of iron. There is no glory in it, only erosion. If death finds you on the battlefield, embrace it, for it is a gift the machine will never grant. I am Ulrich Venar. I was captain of the Iron Hammers. I was a prisoner of steel. I was a dreadnought, and now at last I am at peace.